between now and close of symposium this evening, we're just going to change gears slightly and look at some young farmers that are pushing innovation across the Bega Valley. I think we've set a pretty high bar this morning from the farmers that have already participated. So today we'll now just take a bit of a look at some different areas. So first up, I'd actually like to call on Ashleigh Rood to come on over. I think she had a very well-rounded introduction from Sean Morgan this morning. I think the piece that Sean left off was the fact that in her spare time, Ashleigh is actually a mountain climber. She's going to take us on a little bit of a journey around her steep learning curve in the Bega Valley. So over to you, Ash.
Thank you. My journey, a steep learning curve. I started farming in 2012. I had no exposure to agriculture. I dived headfirst into running a dairy farm. With my then fiancé, we purchased the existing herd and began leasing the farm in the October 2012. I soon learnt to milk cows from then. White Gold Holsteins and Jerseys was born, and we worked at creating our mission statement, and that is providing quality milk from high quality cattle. Family came in there too. We're raising two beautiful daughters to be strong, resilient and empathetic humans. Juggling a young family is tough and extremely challenging. But the life we provide our growing daughters of having a hands-on exposure to animals and the environment is so incredibly fulfilling. Learning, personal development and leadership are the three things that I always push myself to achieve. I applied for Dairy Path in early 2018. The program has been tailor-made for my aspirations and goals. And the program is beginning to wrap up. I take away how to set smart goals and achieve outcomes. A fabulous support network of like-minded individuals, and having the confidence to challenge myself when I stood for chair of the Far South Coast Dairy Development Group. Women in dairying on the Far South Coast. I'm passionate for giving recognition to the inspiring women within the dairy industry. Women can be the backbones of many dairying enterprises, so what better way to give these incredible humans the recognition than becoming a key driver in our Women in Dairying group on the Far South Coast. I do call myself a passionate dairy farmer, advocating for the industry and chair of the Far South Coast Dairy Development Group. And that brings me to innovation. Let's have a look at what DDG has been doing within our Bega region. DDG's main focus is supporting all dairy farmers on the Far South Coast through research and development, technical demonstrations and workshops, business management and human resources, communications and information sharing, and networking and social connectivity. Our main partners are Dairy New South Wales and Dairy Australia, Bega Cheese, Local Land Services, Young Dairy Network, and the Far South Coast Farmers Network. DDG's technical projects. So our recent projects have been nitrogen use efficiency trial, which was from 2015 to 2017. The 20 million trees regenerative program, time of sowing, Italian rye and oats, our brassica trial, and our cereal aluminium tolerance trial. Our current projects are our pasture trial network, on Italian and annual ryegrass trial, our MLA paired paddock program, and effluent demonstration project, which Todd spoke about previously. Nitrogen use efficiency trial was partnered with Dairy Australia and Hunter South East LLS, demonstrating best practice nitrogen fertiliser management. For best economic returns, applied nitrogen when the pasture is responsive and moisture is adequate. Responses of 10 to 40 kgs of dry matter per N applied during peak spring growth, but less than 10 kgs of dry matter when nitrogen applied when conditions were suboptimum. The application of lower rates of nitrogen were more frequently after every cut, gave more efficient response. Our 20 million trees project saw 19,000 trees planted across 4 properties in the Bega and Eurobodalla Shires. Time of sowing, Italian rye and oats. The highest yields in ryegrass and oat varieties were achieved in February sown varieties, emphasising the value of sowing early. The slow establishment and fewer cuts and slow growth rates of the May and June sown varieties resulted in significant lower total yields compared to February, March and April sown varieties. Our brassica trial is a comparison of early to mid-late maturing brassicas, which is the forage rape hybrids and leafy turnips. All varieties had similar yields, but the mid to late maturing varieties, which were all rape varieties, had better utilisation. The leafy turnips had similar yields, but lower utilisation. Our cereal aluminium tolerance trial in 2018 saw more farmers had been exploring wheat as an option to fill winter feed gap, hence the need for the trial. The trial demonstrated crops such as rye, corn and oats are tolerant to high aluminium and acidic soils, whereas wheat is sensitive to aluminium and acidic soils. The pasture trial networks of perennial ryegrass trial from 2016 to 2019 and the Italian and annual ryegrass trial from 2019 is still ongoing. The partnership between DDG, Meat and Livestock Australia and the Australian Seed Federation had 3 blind trials looking at the performance of 19 perennial ryes, 16 Italian ryes and also 16 annual ryes in a dryland setting. Perennial program is due for completion in the coming weeks. The results will be made available through the pasture trial network. Italian and annual rye project is still ongoing. MLA's paired paddock program is partnered with LLS and Meridian Agriculture, demonstrating the economics of removing nutritional constraints to pasture productivity through fertiliser application. 6 paired paddock sites are being established across both beef and dairy properties within the Bega Valley. And then lastly, that Todd spoke on earlier, is the effluent reuse demonstration. This is partnered with LLS and Bega Cheese and the Dairy Research Foundation, demonstrating the comparisons between solid, liquid and composted effluent and local government recycled organic waste products as fertiliser. We are lucky enough to be on site at Kimbers tomorrow to see how the trial is progressing. I would like to thank the past chairs and the visionaries to create what we have been able to within our region. Thank you.
Wow, there's one busy woman, hey. So what we'll do is hold on to questions to the very end, and then we'll have the opportunity for you to ask questions from across the panel. Okay, just taking a slightly different look to what's happening in the Bega Valley, we'll hear from Andrew Darcy, who's going to talk about AMS, technology in the dairy industry. So, Andrew is a progressive, fifth-generation dairy farmer in the Bega Valley. With his family, they milk 380 cows through 6 Lely robots in a partially irrigated grazing system with a feed pad. Andrew is passionate about improving dairy farmers' returns whilst trying to spend time with his wife and 2 children. A true pioneer in adoption of robotic milking systems, Andrew brings to the symposium years of experience in adoption and adaptation of technology and automation into dairy production. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Greg. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you for having me here today. And yes, my name's Andrew Darcy. I'm a dairy farmer here in the Bega Valley. I'm part of a family operation just on the outskirts of town here. I've been asked today to come and talk to you a little bit about what we've done based around technology, what we've learnt from implementing technology on the farm, and where I see technology going in agriculture and the dairy industry into the future. So it was actually in 2008, coming towards the end of the millennial drought, our family business started to really pull our business apart and look at where we were going, what we were doing and what was affecting us. And our feed costs were skyrocketing. It was partly because of the drought, but then also we weren't spending enough time and energy growing and focusing on homegrown fodder. So over a number of years, we looked at different ways and pulled our business apart to see where we could do some savings and where we could utilise our time better. So currently, at that time, we were milking 300 cows on 500 acres in a herringbone dairy. We're having 1.5 to 2 labour units spending between 9 to 10 hours a day just on milking. So that wasn't including AI time, treatment, cows, calves or anything like that. We started to look at robots. We travelled all around Australia and New Zealand and even over into Europe and the US to look at robots. Robots in Australia was still at a very young level then. In 2011, we actually saw, in regards to technology, a big step in robotics, and that was we were looking at a number of different companies at the time, and we saw through Lely with their Lely A4 robot. At the end of 2011, we decided to sign up and move ahead with that, mainly based around the reasons that we at the time, from how we'd pulled our business apart, but we at the time had great staff. We could see that the amount of time that was getting spent in the dairy and the hours that they were doing early mornings and late evenings, they were getting exhausted and we were going to lose them. And they were worthwhile hanging on to. My father and myself, we were getting exhausted as well and over it, and we're also spending too much time based in around the dairy rather than working on the business rather than in the business. So we looked at ways, the robots for us looked at a way of retaining good staff, spending less time milking cows and more time focusing on homegrown feed and creating a better lifestyle balance for ourselves, our staff and their families. And also moving into that next era of technology and what we could use that in our business and in our herd based around management. So once we started off and headed off milking with robots, within 12 to 18 months after that we moved to milking 400 cows and took on another 1,000 acres. When we put the robots in, we reduced our labour unit by half, so we just put off one casual. But that same labour unit that we had beforehand, we were farming an extra 1,000 acres. We originally had heifers on adjustment. We brought them back home and we're focusing on, they moved throughout different areas of the business, focusing on particularly those guys on homegrown feed. And nowadays, we spend, based around in the dairy shed, one labour unit spends between 3 to 4 hours a day, and those tasks include from hosing out the dairy, treatment and AI cows, calving cows and getting cows and calves in, feeding calves, and daily maintenance and of the robots and around the shed. All our staff work between the hours of 8 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. That has been a really attractive component for us to be able to keep and maintain staff, and I see that as society develops, like those type of people, and we all see it ourselves, that it's getting harder and harder to find the ones that want to come in at 4 o'clock in the morning and milk, and even though they get time during the day, will come back in the afternoon. For Dad and myself, our hours are definitely not restricted to that. We will start any time between 3 in the morning and sometimes during silage season, but most days normally start between 5 and 6 in the morning and finish between 5 or 6 at night. But not all our time is spent in the dairy. So it took the cows 48 hours to adapt to the robots. We could push them into the shed after 48 hours and they'd walk through the robots themselves. Within 2 months' time, they were travelling around the farm in a voluntary-based manner, but it took us about 2 years ourselves to adapt to that type of farming system. When we did it, robots were very young in Australia, so there weren't many farms and farmers we really knew, and it was still being adapted in a pasture-based system. It had already been working very successfully in a barn-based systems in the US and Europe, and also like at a service level, it was still very young in Australia. We developed a very close relationship with Lely Australia and our local dealer Truck and Tractor, and since day one we've worked very close together to make this all successful. The biggest learning curve was how to be standing in and around the cows and knowing what they're doing and how they're doing, to sitting behind a computer and using that data to manage the cows, the health and everything based around that. Getting the right balance between service and maintenance. We originally in the start, like you think, oh, we've put in these robots, we don't have to be in the dairy anymore. So we went down to one labour unit spending between 45 minutes and an hour in the dairy. And it wasn't too long that little problems started to sneak up behind us because we just weren't doing that, spending that amount of time on service. Because we have to remember, we've gone from using 20 sets of cups to milk 400 cows to 6 sets of cups. So the use, we're using less things, but the more components are being used. Working with technology, as in learning a new type, working with sensors and all that type of stuff. Managing social conditions, seasonal conditions around voluntary cow flow, and the impact of managing nutrition costs and production during periods of fully grazing, periods of total mixed ration and periods of partial mixed ration, using a partial mixed ration, which was all, between when over in the middle of January at times to go into a full TMR-based ration, and then autumn and spring we're fully grazing, and winter we'll be using partial. It has not been an easy transition, not only because of the challenges we undertook in the first 2 years, but also in the last 7 years, the Australian dairy industry has had a number of challenges in itself. And we've endured them. Doesn't matter, a robot at the end of the day is just a tool. It really is nearly exactly the same as what a herringbone or a rotary is. We're just taking a bit of labour unit out to do it and pulling more data out of the system. But everything else that we've been challenged by, and everyone in this room has been challenged by, we've been exposed to as well. Over the last 7 years, we've seen a big increase in the development of technology based around robots. Technology has become far more reliable, and in particular over the last 12 to 18 months, we've started to see a big drop in the costs of parts and repairs and maintenance. And this is as technology is advancing and becoming more widely used on a global level, and it will continue to do so. The transition from conventional farming to robotics has become a lot smoother in Australia, as both the process of tech and service providers and farmers are adapting and understanding all this type of technology. Now, I've been asked to talk to you about technology in the future. And I know, and actually for this next part of my presentation, I need you for all to step aside from what's going on in the industry today, because it's very hard when we've got our margins so tight, the amount of stress that's been put in and around the industry to think about the future, where we're going to go, and how technology is going to influence us into the future. I actually follow and study a fair bit a guy called Tony Seba, and he is a data analyst out of Stanford University and he looks at the disruption of technology and what's having on industry. And I've pulled some of his data for this presentation. And yeah, he's got a good insight of where technology is going to go into the future. Now, it doesn't matter based around technology, it is going to become a big part of our industry into the future. Whether it's in milking, irrigation, water, effluent, data management and measurement, pasture and crops, feed and nutrition, genetics, and even autonomous vehicles. Before we go forward, we have to look back. And I want you to, this is a photo of New York in 1900. And I would like you to try and spot the car in amongst all the horse and carriages there. There it is right there. One car in New York City in 1900. Now we move forward only 13 years later in the early 1900s, and can you spot the horse and cart in the street submerged with all the cars? They're sitting right over in the back there. What do you think the attitude of the people back in this situation was when that car drove up the street of New York City? Nothing's more reliable than old Ted here in front of me pulling my cart. That thing's too expensive. That'll break down. We as society develop those attitudes faster than what we even realise. When we move forward now to 1985, we look at the cell phone. That was when our first cell phone was established. Not only do we get it wrong about what technology is going to do, but also some of the best analysts in the world get it wrong about where technology is going to end up. So analysts predicted, leading up to 2000, that in America, 900,000 Americans would own a cell phone. But in the year 2000, 109 million Americans owned a cell phone. That's a massive difference. We go back to look at when the iPhone was developed and established. So Steve Ballmer, who was in 2007, he was the CEO of Microsoft, one of the leading companies in the world. Their attitude was that there is no chance that the iPhone will get any significant market share. No chance. Big advancements and breakthroughs in technology happen when the development of technology reaches a certain point and a business has the ability to make that technology cost viable. And so that's where we move into the iPhone. So I think it was about 2007 when the actual iPhone was developed and released. And so that is when we saw that the technology based around lithium batteries and touchscreens and the costs of those technology converged to become more viable. And that is when those businesses then got to get together and the iPhone was developed. If we go back and look at computers and how they've also developed and the cost of those computers over time, we look at a $600 computer, the technology that it can do at present day would be worth $600. If you go back, that exact same technology back 20 years was worth $600,000 or cost $600,000. You go back 40 years ago and that same technology would cost $600 million, and 60 years, $600 billion. So I know we get caught up with costs in this, like in today's world, but technology is going to become more affordable into the future. Autonomous vehicles. I know when we all saw these machines released a couple of years ago, we thought, far too expensive. I didn't even think that that would be in my lifetime. And I still don't know if it is, but I want to draw on something now where there is great potential that it could be here in the next 5 years at an affordable level on farm. So LiDAR sensors, that's been the biggest development in technology, and LiDARs are laser and radar. So a laser is sent out to pick up, objects out in front of it and sent back by radar. So they're the key components to autonomous vehicles. All right. So in 2012, that LiDAR was worth $70,000. You need at least 4 LiDARs on an autonomous vehicle. So analysts said that there is no way that technology will be up and running until 2050. By 2013, that technology, LiDAR sensors, were $10,000. So in 12 months' time, they dropped by $60,000. In 2014, $1,000. 2017, $250. And in 2019, they are apparently releasing LiDARs valued at $90 and the size of a postage stamp. So let's look and see how this applies to agriculture. This here looks at the global agriculture and the adaptation and also market revenue of how technology is going to be potentially taken up. Now, if you look at here we are in 2019 and where their prediction is for 2025, and you look where dairy farm robots, the exponential growth in that, also amongst other things is in harvesters, autonomous tractors, that's only 5-6 years away. And if you look at everything in the past also, with a lot of it based around technology, they've always underestimated that growth. Technology is going to become a big important part of us as we move into a new age of agriculture, and data is going to become our biggest friend and our biggest key to be able to manage and measure everything. The age-old thing about wages. So this is 2019, from April 2019, the minimum wages on a global level, and look where we are in Australia. There are actually 2 countries, Netherlands and Switzerland, are above us. And you look at our competitors on the dairy market level between New Zealand, United Kingdom, some of those European countries, Canada and the US, where labour is a key component within our industry, and look where we already are on a cost comparison. And when you think back to what we've talked about and looked at where technology has been and where it's come from and the cost associated around it, so as our technology improves, our cost is coming down a bit. Who here really thinks that our cost of labour is going to come down? Now, I know this is hard to fathom, take in and think about because our industry has been through a lot, and particularly in the last couple of years. We've all been in survival mode rather than thinking about the future. Margins have been tight and capital expenditure and improvement on farms has pretty much been non-existent. We need to look at a way of an industry to be able to move forward and rebuild from the damage that's been done. Is technology a way to do it? It's a tool in the toolbox to do it. It's not the answer, but it's a tool. But to be able to do those types of things, we need to see better returns throughout the entire industry, and particularly at farmer level. Looking at government assistance and incentives, is that a way of us moving through and getting technology on our farms and in our business at a faster rate? Actually, a lot of our global competitors, there is some sort of subsidy based around either technology or capital improvements on farm, not necessarily based around milk floor prices and that type of stuff, but it's based around improving efficiencies. Our attitude and culture of an industry probably needs to change as well. We seem to focus on the negative stories, the bad news, and they run far wilder and far faster than what we do of the positive and successful stories. So I'd like to thank you for your time today, and we'd like to see where we are in the future.
Wow, how good was that, hey? And he told me that he didn't have time to pull much together, so I'm impressed. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, now really just continuing on with this theme of data, we're going to hear from Will Russell, another young local Bega farmer who's going to talk about a data-driven approach to technology. So Will grew up on a local farm here in the Bega Valley called Jelgowrie, milking 300 mainly Illawarra cows. He's been away from home for some time, focusing on an engineering degree, and he's also worked with the Bega cheese packaging plant. He's now in the process of relocating back to the family farm. He's keen on adopting new technologies, with the first already being remote soil moisture monitoring and the use of DairyBase Software. In the coming years, he hopes to implement a form of cow ID/draft, a stage of lactation feeding, and a paddock management software system. So I know Will's dad is in the crowd, and I'm hoping Rob is prepared for these changes to come. Over to you, Will.
Thanks, Greg. Good afternoon, everyone. It's about data, but hopefully it won't bore you. So I want to talk to you about a data-driven approach to dairy technology. And a bit about myself first. Yeah, we farm 5 minutes out of Bega on the road to Tathra, where we've been there for over 150 years. And I believe I'm the 7th generation on that farm. So our farm is 242 hectares in total, with 125 hectares of milking platform, and about 80% of it can be irrigated. We milk 300 Illawarra cows, mainly Illawarra cows, year-round, and they get fed on a feed base of kikuyu, oversown with ryegrass, and our winter silage feed comes from maize, corn, and a fair bit of lucerne. We also feed 6 to 7 kilos in the bale, which translates to about 2 tonnes per cow per year. And we also have access to runoff blocks for heifers and beef cows. So I've got a bit of footage here of our farm. You can see the cows there ready to be milked. We milk in a 20-side swing over dairy with automatic cup removers and rising bales. But as far as technology goes, that's about it in the dairy currently. You'll also notice we don't have a feed pad. We feed all our silage out onto the ground in the paddock as they're grazing pastures. And if we look to see where our feed base comes from, it's really driven by our irrigation. And so a major component of that is 25 hectares of a 5-span centre pivot next to the dairy. And also we have about the same area in bike shift irrigation in front of the dairy, which is all the kikuyu base. Looking at the farm map, we actually have 5 different irrigation systems, so there's a lot going on. Our farm is split by a major road, so for the cows to get to our day feeds, we have to cross them twice a day, every day. And you'll also notice we have 18 hectares that is inaccessible to grazing. And so this is just another bit of footage of the other side of our farm with the pods, 5 hectares of pods to the left there around the hay sheds. And then we span around looking down onto Gilla flats, which are floodable flats that we irrigate about 50 hectares with hard hoses. So in the next 6 months, the plan is for me to come back full-time on the farm, and over the last 12 months I've sort of been part-time. And I've been asking different questions about where we should take the farm in the future, and in particularly because we've got such a large portion of irrigation, and if we get allocated a fairly big proportion of our water from Brogo Dam, we sort of have the ability to grow any crop type we want. But the question is, what combination of crops would most suit us going forward? So crops that maximise our profit, crops that best suit our calving pattern, or if we need to slightly change our calving pattern to suit our growth periods. Yeah, how do we minimise our feed gap, and if we have little water, what crops do we target first and what crops do we let go? And I think the only way to answer these questions is through data, and in particular recording the inputs you put on your paddocks with both pastures and crops, and the yield that you're getting off those crops. And from those two things, we can work out the cost of feed in dollars per dry matter tonne. So to record all this data and to analyse it, we are going to be using 3 technologies going into the future, and we've already started using 2 of these. So they're DairyBase, Pasture.io, and GreenBrain soil moisture monitoring. So to go in a bit of depth into these, DairyBase, you've probably already come across it. It's a free Dairy Australia software where you basically put in your 12 months of financial data as well as your farm physical data into a system, and it spits out a standardised report of all your key elements to your farm. So I find this great for internally benchmarking as the main priority, but you can also use it to benchmark against other farms. And I reckon it'll probably, now that I've got it set up, it'll take 4 hours per year to input the data. And so what we're finding coming out of these reports over the last 3 years, not including the year that's just been, in terms of feed base, I just put up these 5 things. So in terms of homegrown feed, I feel we are doing quite well at growing the feed at 60% of our total feed, with 40% coming from the concentrates. But we could still push that higher with increased water and nitrogen. But the other real opportunity here is the homegrown feed that we are grazing, which is only at 60%. And even though we do have 18 hectares, which is inaccessible to grazing, I still believe we can really get up towards that 80% by growing our mainly silage crops on that block that can't be grazed. And the other key ones, we're a little lower on the nitrogen scale, but after listening to a few presentations today, it doesn't sound like we're that low. And water. So the Brogo Dam, rarely do we get our full allocation out of Brogo Dam, but on an average year of a 50% water allocation, we should be using all of that allocation, and we have a real opportunity to use more water. And so if we focus on the 3 things of increased grazing and better use of nitrogen and water, I firmly do believe that we can get that feed cost down for our business. So how we're going to manage the grazing and the, in particular, nitrogen application is through Pasture.io. This is a pasture management application on the computer where it does two main things. It records paddock treatment records, so you can put a cost to every action you do on each paddock, and it also records your yield that you're getting off your grazable paddocks. And so by doing these two things, hopefully we can maximise our pasture quality and quantity. So the first aspect is the paddock treatment record. So just inputting all our fertilisation, sprayings, seeding and harvesting into a digital farm map. And at the end of the year, the plan is to draw out that data and those costs associated with that crop grown in the paddock, and to see what our input costs are. And the second half to the software is really about recording pastures, the yield that you're getting off those grazing pastures. And there's sort of three ways you can do this: either a rising plate meter, a trailing pasture meter, or if you want to pay money to Pasture.io, they provide a remote satellite technology service. In the coming couple of years, we have just purchased a used trailing pasture meter, so we'll be using that to begin with, but we'll see how the remote satellite technology really compares to our own data gathering. And the third and final piece to the jigsaw is how we manage our water. So GreenBrain is a remote soil moisture monitoring software where you have a base hub in the centre of the farm, which you pay a $400 a year subscription to. And because this is all LLS funded, we didn't have to put any upfront capital costs with that hub and the first sensor that we put in on our farm. And because it's a LLS driven project, the plan is to maybe have up to 6 dairy farms all on one hub with up to 10 sensors on each farm if they want it. So we put this in December last year, our first soil moisture probe hooked up to GreenBrain, and basically it spits out a real-time sort of profile of your moisture in your soil. So we put this under our maize crop, and what you can see here, basically you have to keep the pink line in between the two white lines. Fairly simple. And you can also see the blue bars and the green bars. Blue bars are the rain events that help push that soil moisture up, and the green bars are the irrigation. So this obviously records everything that we've done, and with a bit of calculation in Excel, we can find out the cost of the crop. So we believe we got about 23 tonnes of dry matter per hectare from the crop, and with only using 1.5 megs of irrigation on it, for our systems, that sort of came out at $175 per dry matter tonne. But it sort of also highlighted that if we had to irrigate that whole crop from a very poor rainfall of summer rainfall, it means our cost of cost per tonne of dry matter would go up probably past $250 a tonne, and because that's fed on the ground, we could have up to 30% wastage. So the cost of our corn can skyrocket fairly quickly in the wrong conditions. So in a nutshell, I'm hoping over the next 2 to 3 years we can gather all this data using these three technologies. The first one being the paddock data, so the yield that we're getting off our crops plus the megs of water we use. All our costings coming from our accounting software, DairyBase and Pasture.io, and then putting all that together and hopefully build a profile of, if we say grow 10 different crops and pastures, which ones are going to fit in with our system in the most cost-effective way. So hopefully, we can get the answers to the questions I posed earlier in the presentation. Just quickly, I thought I'd just focus on 3 future technologies I thought really had some good potential, but I don't think are there yet. And they are future feed, virtual fencing, and NPK soil probes. So future feed is basically a red seaweed found off the coast of Queensland, and CSIRO have run trials which they state reduces the methane by 99% in dairy cows. And this not only lets us become carbon neutral pretty much overnight if what they're stating is true, it also means that the methane is being put back into the cow, which could increase our feed efficiency. And it all helps with our social licence to continue doing what we all do. The second one is virtual fencing. You'll probably hear a little bit about this tomorrow. Basically, I can see real benefits in eliminating internal fences and that side of our capital costs, and more precise strip grazing, which would therefore lead to more precise pasture utilisation. And the final one, NPK soil probes. So just like the real-time water probe that we have, this is along the same lines of knowing exactly what nutrients you have in your soil at any point in time. So you can have more precise fertiliser application and hopefully reduced fertiliser costs. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how these 3 technologies sort of develop in the coming years. So thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Thanks, Will. Gee whiz, Rob Russell, you've got some work ahead of you. Where are you? Yep. Okay, we are very tight on time, though I am sure there are some questions out there for these 3 innovative farmers, and I've got 1 or 2 myself, so if you could put up your hand and obviously state where you're from and which person your question is for.
Jane Sherborne. Just to you, Andrew, about robotics. My husband isn't very keen on robotics and sees them as possibly an investment into the future, but I'm trying to see a little bit closer. What would you say to him if he was here to convince him to go into robotics now?
I wouldn't. I'm not here to convince anyone to go into robots. Some people want to do robots and some people are suited to robots, but some people aren't as well. So when I talk about technology, robots are going to be part of it, but technology in milking can be anything to milk meters, cup removers, teat sprays, the whole lot. So I think it still is on, every single farming business in Australia is different, no one's the same. And that comes down to how that farm and the climate around that and the people around that want to work and how they do work. So I do think, if you look at the rate that technology is increasing, that robots and robotic milking is going to become a bigger part of it. And I think that time in itself, whether it be another year or 2 or 5 years or 10 years, it'll probably convince your husband himself. Yeah.
Just while the crowd thinks of some questions, could we strip things back 5 years for each of you? And I'd like you to tell me what advice you'd give your 5-year younger self, starting with you, Ash.
Gosh, I had as much passion as I do today 5 years ago, so I don't think it would be passion. I'm not really sure. I love what I do. Passion comes in there, so I don't think I would have changed anything. We all make mistakes along the journey of life and we move forward from that. So no, to go back 5 years, I would have looked a little bit fresher, pre-children, a few less stresses, but I love what I do in the industry, so yeah.
Thanks, Ash.
I'll go back 5 years and look at and say that I wish we could have and would have analysed our farming system based around as into what we were doing then and what we're doing now, to try and, particularly the last 2 years, based around this dry period, and we still are quite exposed to the feed market between grain, and our forage is very limited these days, but we still did get caught out last year. And I wish that you look at what some people are doing today, and Colin's a very prime example, and I've had a number of conversations with Colin, and I look at, farming system based around lucerne, homegrown feed based around homegrown grain and that type of stuff, compared to, what we've done and where we are now.
Will?
I suppose make the most of your time off farm before you come back. I mean, I believe I'm not even back yet, but I did try and do that. But the closer the day comes when I'm full time on the farm, you sort of realise there's so many things that you could have done, and you could have learnt about the farm business from somebody else, maybe going working on a farm somewhere else, or just make the most of those opportunities. And once again, I don't regret anything, but I could have taken it up a notch and done some more things. Yeah.
Thanks, Will. Any questions? One up the back there.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Phil Pittalow, just from Bega here. Part of new technology is very much around a lot of information, and sometimes we call it big data. Effectively, it's very messy data when you try and manage as a farmer. Have you guys got any comments on how, as a farmer, you can manage this flow of data coming into your business?
Simplify it as best possible. And that's also based around the programs that you're using. I'll use Lely as an example in their T4C program, but when we started using robots, it was just because we were looking and managing our cows from behind the cow rather from in front and around the cow, and moving that into looking behind the computer. But as they've taught us, like they've learnt themselves, and as we've learnt ourselves through them, it's really how to use that technology and that data and the format that is presented to you. So it's that'll evolve as time goes on, I think.
Yeah, I'd second that, but also, there is so much data that is out there that you can't really find any answers from without basically putting it into Excel. So just having someone on farm that's proficient in Excel, or getting a consultant or anyone in who can crunch some numbers for you is really helpful.
Good stuff. Well, I'd love to continue this chat. I think we're going to have to do that this evening on the instruction of keeping Tara on the right side. We might just wind it up there. Ladies and gentlemen, can you just show some appreciation for these young farmers?